And I personally don't like photos. Like studio photography is for family is not for me. I just find it awkward and stiff. Like people dress up in a certain way, not sometimes not even in their own clothes. So some photographers have client closets. And I completely understand that these photos have a place, but they're not for me, especially if someone dresses up in clothes that's not their own, or they go shopping for the photo session and then you have a beautiful photo of your family hanging on the wall and everybody knows this is not actually your family. Nobody ever smiles like this or is in harmony like this, because everybody, like, families are crazy. I like to capture reality, and that's not necessarily always the most pretty thing.
Hey, welcome to episode 354 of the Beginner Photography Podcast, brought to you by CloudSpot, which is the easiest way to deliver and sell your photos online. I'm your host, Raymond Hadfield, and today we're chatting with documentary family life photographer Anja Poehlmann about how shooting every day can transform not only your creativity, but your personality as well. You know, there are really certain types of photographers or certain photographers who I find, or in this case, recommended to me, thank you, Julie, who are more than just photographers. They embrace creativity of all kinds: photography, video, writing, mixed media, all these things that I just adore. And as much as I love photography, I don't think that photography is the perfect tool to tell every story. And leaning into those other creative processes can help produce really interesting and entertaining results. So I want you to be sure to check out the show notes of this episode to see some of Anja's work, because it truly is some great stuff. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get on into today's podcast interview with Anja Poehlmann. I want to know, when did you know that photography was going to play an important role in your life?
I find this quite hard to answer because there wasn't a specific moment when I realized, oh, photography is something that's gonna stick with me or something. But I think when it was more than just I would just carry a camera and just take a few photos here and there was when I moved to Hawaii for half a year. So I was in university, and university in Germany is great because you don't have to pay any tuition fees. So you can extend your student status for as long as you want. Not for as long as you want, but for a while. So before I finished my university degree, I decided to study abroad for a while. But I realized, like, studying abroad means a lot of money and I don't have that money. So instead I did an interview in Hawaii for half a year at the Hawaiian ABC TV station. And so when I went there, that was literally the other side of the world. So I took my camera. At that point, I'm going to age myself here, but that was when digital cameras kind of came out, and I had my Canon PowerShot something bridge camera with 4 megapixels, which was absolutely amazing at that point.
Mind-blowing, yeah.
I know. And I took that with me, and I actually created a website and created my own blog. So that was before I knew about WordPress and Blogstomp or Blogspot or what they were called. I'm not even sure they were around at that point, but I created a blog on my website that I coded myself because I learned that in university, and put my photos on there. And that was my way to kind of share my experience there with my friends and family at home that I wouldn't see for half a year. So I think that was the first time that I used my camera for more than just taking in like a few photos when I'm on vacation or something, but kind of show how life looks like on the other side of the world. And it kind of spiraled from there. So I came back from Hawaii, and I was living with a guy there who said, you really have an eye for this, you should keep going. And I came back, and my dad had a DSLR, the Canon EOS 300D, like the first Rebel.
Okay.
And I kept using it, and he was just getting annoyed that I kept using it. So he got me my own, which was then the follow-up of that. And it literally spiraled from there. And from there, I just literally dove into photography and learning everything about how to expose the image correct and how to play with different lenses and everything. And then slowly kind of grew into a business.
So for you to make the decision to go to Hawaii and start a blog and take these photos to share images of your life and what that's like, tells me that there was still something inside of you that really valued imagery before that point. So were you taking lots of photos as a kid as you were growing up, and they were just snapshots? Is that correct?
I didn't take that many. So I had like a point and shoot camera when I was a kid, but I wasn't like that photographer kid. Like I had a friend who was into photography, and I always thought like, that's so cool, I should do that. And I never did it. And I took one on me, like with me when I went on vacation with friends or my family, but I wasn't actually into photography until I was at university and the digital cameras came out, because I found that a lot easier to work with, because you could see instantly what your image looks like, and you didn't have to wait a week until everything got developed, and you realize, oh, they're all bad. Can't use any of them. Obviously, I would still use them. I looked through my old photos that I took when I was a kid or a teenager, because I went to my parents' place over Christmas, and I brought back some old photos, and they're like terribly exposed. Obviously, point and shoot doesn't really know what you want to expose for, and terribly framed, like no composition at all for the most part. And if there was a good composition, I'm pretty sure that was an accident. So yeah, photography was really only something I got into once the digital cameras came out, because it was so much more accessible.
And just to clarify, you really started to get into photography while you were in Hawaii, or it wasn't until you got back that you thought, oh, wow, this is amazing?
It was really when I got back and had a DSLR compared
Gotcha.
to just a bridge camera. So the bridge camera does, I don't know if people who start photography now even know what bridge camera is. It's basically a hybrid between a point and shoot and a DSLR. So you can't change the lens, but you can still change. You can shoot manually if you want to. So you can change aperture and shutter speed and ISO and all of these things. So you have a lot more control over what the camera takes, but not as much as with a camera where you can change the lens.
Right. Good. Thank you for clarifying that. I'm sure I didn't even think about that. I don't even know how many bridge type cameras there are still available today, or why what reason someone might have to get one outside of just an iPhone, or just go straight into a DSLR. So when you got back from Hawaii and you said to yourself, I think I'm going to really invest some time into learning photography. What was that route like? Were you taking classes? Was it through a book? Was it just being self-taught? How did you learn photography?
It was mostly self-taught. So it was the time, so that was in 2006 when I really got into photography. So I got my camera, my own DSLR in December 2005 for Christmas. And after that, I kind of started buying different lenses, and I read a lot on forums online. So there was a lot of online photography forums where it's kind of what the Facebook groups are now, where you can get ideas, people share their photos, people critique them, sometimes unasked. Um,
That
as that
still happens
happens,
today, yeah.
still happens exactly. But I just kind of used the dials and saw what happened. It was really fun. So I went out with this camera and went for a walk, and all photos were completely black. I was like, what happened? And it was because it was just that the settings were completely wrong. I didn't let enough light into my camera through the lens. So the shutter speed was 1/1000 at like f8 on a gray winter day
Yeah.
where you can't see anything. So I kind of tried to understand how these numbers work together. I did read a book, but I read a lot on forums and just kind of tested and saw what happens when I change some of the numbers and kind of work with that. And then for a long time, I kind of worked with like semi-automatic modes, like the aperture priority,
Hmm.
and kind of got a grip like how the camera would expose an image based on that. So I just learned by doing it. And I do actually think that's the best thing, by just literally everything you want to learn, just practice and just see what happens. You can't really mess anything up unless you're working for a client that pays you. But if you're starting out in photography, the chance that that's going to happen is very low, because you probably wouldn't take a job when you just got your camera a month ago.
You'd be surprised. I get quite a few emails. But
Really.
anyway, so when it comes time to trying to learn these things on your own, that can be a steep learning curve if you don't know what it is that you're trying to figure out. You don't know what the results are going to be. So, what were some of the biggest challenges that you had gone through?
So something that I noticed took me a while to really understand is why I like certain pictures better than others.
Hmm.
And that was depth of field. So just seeing how so at first when I started, I didn't actually notice why I like one portrait better than the other, because I didn't really learn to see an image like that. So I saw someone had a really nice bokeh in the background, like really nice blurry, and you could see the portrait of the person, and it just stood out. And then he had another one where it was really cluttered. It's like, it's kind of the same photo. Why do I like this and not this? And it took me a while to really understand what the difference is and how to achieve that. And one thing that took a few weeks or months maybe to really nail that, to understand that. And then that was the time when I shot everything at 1.8
Of
or
course.
1.4 when I had my 50 millimeter, because you can. And the other thing that took a lot longer, like that took actually years, and I'm still working on that, is seeing light, how light changes an image, how it affects an image, how sometimes when you take a photo and you think, oh, it looks really pretty, and then you look close and you're like, oh, these shadows under the eyes and under the nose that you didn't actually notice before, but once you see it, you can't unsee it, and then you need to figure out how to work around that, how to change someone's, like move someone's face, or like move to a different spot, and kind of move away from just looking at the pretty background and looking at what the subject does first, like how is a subject in a scene, how it makes them look best, or if it's not a person, if it's a landscape, like how can I get the best angle to make sure that I use the light to my advantage rather than disadvantage. And that's something I'm still learning.
I think that's something that many photographers just work on forever, right? Like there's no way that you could, I mean, you could be like really good at light, but it seems like after it, interviewing quite a number of photographers, it seems like those who have staying power, I guess, for lack of a better term, are those who are infinitely curious on how to make their images better. And when photography is just nothing but capturing whatever light is in front of you, figuring out to the best of your ability how to see and control that light, I think is going to serve you very well, because it can't not, right? Like that was a terrible way
Yeah.
to end that question. But I want to move more into what is it that you are doing today? Because at the time, it sounds like photos of friends and family. How did that transition into doing some paid work?
It kind of was a progression, like a very slow, steady progression. So I took photos of everything that came in front of me, literally everything. And then friends came and asked, can you take photos of my family? Can you take photos of my child? I've just had a baby. Can you take photos of them? And I did that for my friends. And then friends of friends came, and I just charged like 50 euros, or they paid a dinner for me or something. And then at some point, people came to me asking, can you shoot my wedding? It was like, I've never even attended one, so I'm not sure if I should do that. And I just said yes to. I practiced with a friend, and then at her wedding, I was maid of honor, and I brought my camera because I always had my camera on me. I took some photos there and practiced a little bit, and then someone who I didn't know, who came through a friend, they got married, and that was a big wedding. There was 200 guests. They were all young Christians. So she was 18, he was 24, and like the whole room was full of young Christians who were about to get married in the next 5 years. So I charged them £250 for like a whole day, like
Nothing.
14 hours,
Yeah.
absolutely nothing. And funny enough, after the church ceremony, one of my cards failed. It said like, please format your card, and I had a little panic attack, put it away. But I remembered that a few days before, I read in that Flickr group about someone who had something like this happen to them, and they got them back through a recovery software. So I was like, I'm just going to put that away and just pretend that didn't happen and just keep going. So you have to be prepared for like things that you were actually not prepared for, which was, I think that was my biggest learning at a paid gig, that this can happen and I need to be prepared for it. Luckily, I had two cameras. So even if those photos had been gone, I still would have had some photos on the other card, on the other camera. I completely veered off. Oh yeah, so basically from that, I then, like, I kind of imagined like lots of young people getting married in the next few years. I got bookings from that one wedding for 5 years. And I only did
Wow.
that part-time. So I had a full-time job as a video producer. And so that was on my weekends, and in the evenings I would edit. But I would, even after I moved from Germany to the UK, I still had people inquire with me, oh, you shot my friend's wedding. Can you shoot ours next year? And I'm like, no, I'm not there anymore. Unless you pay me to come to Germany and pay for my flight and transportation, I will not
Yes.
do that.
Okay, so today you're no longer shooting weddings, right?
Not really. So I did weddings when I came here. So I came to the UK without a job because I wanted to see if I wanted to be a full-time wedding photographer. And I did some second shooting for some photographers and did some work there. I had a few of my own, and then decided I kind of want my weekends back. So, and I still had a full-time job at that point then again, because I ran out of savings. So I just took a job. And at some point, I was just like, I'm not ready to do a whole day Saturday wedding anymore and then be done for Sunday because I'm knackered. And during the week, I might have some time, but all my friends are busy.
Yes.
So I kind of stopped doing them. But now, occasionally, when someone comes, I will take a wedding, but not longer than 5 hours. I only do short weddings, which is actually a good market because most photographers now only offer full day. And there's still a lot of people who don't want coverage all day. They just want, it's just a town hall wedding. They just need someone for an hour or two. And that's kind of what I do occasionally. I do like 2 or 3 a year. So really, really few of
Hmm.
those.
But today you're mainly focused on families, is that right?
Family and small businesses. So I'm a family photographer and a personal branding photographer and filmmaker.
Okay, so let's talk about family photography, because family photography is one of those things that the majority of people listening, they bought their camera because either their family grew or they wanted to document their family or something to that effect. So I want to learn more about your style of family photography, because it's not, hey, everybody get together, get in real close, look at the camera and say cheese. Can you tell me a little bit more about how you approach family photography?
Sure. So my approach is very documentary. So I didn't until like 2, 3 years ago, I didn't even know that was a genre that you could do and make money from. But apparently it is. You just need to find the right people who understand what you're trying to do. So one of my values is honesty and authenticity. And I personally don't like photos. Like studio photography is for family is not for me. I just find it awkward and stiff. And even lifestyle to a point is like people dress up in a certain way, not sometimes not even in their own clothes. So some photographers have client closets and they take them a golden hour to a pretty field and everybody's going to have an hour of fun. And I completely understand that these photos have a place, but they're not for me because they're, to me, they're still too fake, especially if someone dresses up in clothes that's not their own, or they go shopping for the photo session just to match the color scheme of the photo session, what it's supposed to be. And then you have a beautiful photo of your family hanging on the wall, and everybody knows this is not actually your family. Nobody ever smiles like this or is in harmony like this because everybody, like families are crazy, they're chaotic, kids are fighting, they're having tantrums over the silliest things. And it's just, I like to capture those things. I like to capture reality, and that's not necessarily always the most pretty thing. But if I remember back to my own childhood, so I'm the third of three kids, and my parents kind of stopped taking photos of us when we were all out of the cute stage. So my older siblings have a lot more photos of them than me because I was the last. And I really regret that there's not a lot of photos of me with my parents just doing normal things, or me with my siblings, or me alone. My sister and I, we did gymnastics as kids. And I did that for, I think I started when I was 4 and I stopped when I was 10 because my school closed. And there's not a single photo of this.
Oh,
And
wow.
it's really, really sad because this was a big part of my life. Like if you look at a 10-year-old, and 6 years of those 10 years that I've lived have been full of a hobby that doesn't exist on photos. I just want to provide this to families to kind of, I know everybody takes photos of their kids doing like football, whatever they do, what their hobby is with their phones. But it's also like they can't be in the moment in that time. And they are not in the photos unless we take a selfie and like we smile at the selfie, take a goofy photo. And again, these photos have their place, but I want kids from today not be in the same position as I am now, where I look back at my photos and like there's a whole chunk of time missing in photos. And I wish I had them because it would help me understand who I am now. So in the last few years, I've been kind of on this journey to understand where I come from, who I am, why I am the way I am, why I act the way I do. And a lot of that is connected to how I was brought up. And having these photos can help us understand who we used to be and who we are now, kind of as the result of that. So that's why I really, really love just documenting life as it is.
So, when it comes to doing these documentary family sessions, having interviewed some documentary wedding or documentary photographers, family photographers on the podcast, and having seen some online, it seems like there's really several different aspects of this, right? Several different ways that you can go about doing it. You can be hired to be there for from sunup to from PJs to PJs it is, or you could just be there for an hour or an event. How do you tackle that?
So the photography scene in the UK or Europe is very different to the US. So in the US, photography is a lot more ingrained into like a family's life.
Hmm.
So here it's very hard to, I personally find it very hard to find someone who wants me there from PJ to PJ. So my sessions are quite short. They're about 2 hours. And I try to get as much as I can within those 2 hours that kind of defines that family. And I do that by asking them before, like, what are their things that they do during the day? What kind of moments would they like to have captured? So it could be a morning routine, or it could be like afternoon at the playground, or it could be the evening, like the bedtime, getting ready for bed, going to bed, reading a story and something like that. So I would love to, in a way, I would love to do like longer sessions, but I feel like the UK is not quite ready yet. So we still have a bit of time to understand what that means and what the value of that is. So my sessions are a bit shorter than that, but that doesn't mean that I don't get to capture the real moments. I just have to basically have the family needs to decide what kind of moments of the day are most important to them for me to capture.
Do you find that they know what those moments are, or is that more of the role of a photographer to understand what are really the important moments?
I think it's my responsibility to kind of give them guidance. Like I ask them very specific questions. What does a day look like for you? Like a normal Wednesday or a normal Saturday, whatever that. So whenever they book me, they decide what kind of day I would come: Saturday, Sunday, Wednesday, whatever it is, depending on their schedules. And then I ask them, what would a normal day like this look like if I wasn't there? And then can ask specific, like, so what are the things throughout that day that you want your kids to remember visually? And then they're like, actually, yeah, I really like the morning times when we make porridge and sit down at the table, and then the kids start to mess up the house. Or after nap time, especially when the kids are very small and they still nap during the day. Like after nap time, when we then prepare, when we go out, go play, and then we come back and prepare dinner together, something like this. So I do ask them very specific questions for them to understand what the things are that they value most, or what they think that their kids will value most in like a few years' time.
So let me ask, because at least the way that I see, if I were to hire a photographer to photograph our family, for me, the end goal is going to be like, I want a few photos that I can frame. And not necessarily that those are camera aware photos, but there is some element of like, I guess I've never verbalized this before, but there's some element of we are all together, we are all having fun. I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm not sure if I would frame a photo of the whole family, making porridge together. Is there a time where you do try to get more, say, camera aware photos, for lack of a better term, or are those photos of the family making porridge what it is that your families are looking for?
It's a combination. So I do ask people, I do say that to people, like, if there is a moment where you feel like you just want a photo of all of you together, I'm happy to just do that. Like, that doesn't mean that the rest of the day is not documentary. I do want to make sure that I create the photos that will mean the most to my clients. And if that means 10 minutes of the day or my bookings, I just semi pose them or say, like, how about you just sit all on the couch and just read a book together? Kind of figuring out a way that looks natural for them to be on a photo. But that is only if I feel like those people actually really want that. Otherwise, I wouldn't offer that. And
Mm.
I do try to, so with my documentary photos, I try to incorporate as many people as I can in photos. So it's about layering. It's about kind of telling the story through different stories within the frames. It can be that there's one parent with a child on the front doing something, but then shooting through, you can see the other parent with another child doing something else, and then you still have them all in the picture. And if you close your aperture down enough so it's not just something super blurry in the front or something super blurry in the back, you can still see, you can make out who that is in the frame. You still have a family photo that's very camera unaware, that's still, I personally think, ready to be framed.
Hey, Raymond here, and we will get back to the show in just a moment. As a photographer, you want to be able to quickly come up with creative ideas that stand out. So to help you, I put together a list of 46 creative ideas to get you out of a rut that you can download by heading over to creativeimageIdeas.com. And honestly, even if you're not in a rut, shooting any of these creative ideas in this free ebook will help you to think more out of the box and create something unique and give you that critical real-world photography experience. So again, head over to creativeimageIdeas.com to download your free 46 creative photo ideas now. With that, let's get back to today's interview. Gotcha. Yeah. The way that you described it right there, using composition and adding as many people in the family into the image as possible does make it more like, I could imagine if, like, I'm just picturing this in my head, my wife and I in front of the bowl of porridge or whatever, and the kids are mixing it up and we're kind of all in that shot. I could see framing something like that. So that does make sense. I got a question about the video that you have on your website. You have this really cool video that explains kind of who you are and what it is that you do. And in it, you say, I want to show you how the everyday moments are just as important as those days that we celebrate. I want to know how you do that, because arguably something like a wedding is one of the most important days of somebody's life. But how, as a photographer, do you make making porridge in the morning or going to the park with the kids? How do you, as a photographer, make those moments as powerful as an image as one possibly shot on a wedding day?
Well, first of all, like I said with the questionnaire, I find out what moments mean the most to them. And it could be that they're all like just hanging out together or doing something. So the photos that I try to create are very specific to what the client tells me. And then just shooting, again, trying to use layering and using composition in a way that shows how people are connected. So for me, connection is a really, really big thing. So it doesn't necessarily always have to be touching, but touching is the easiest way to see the connection, where someone just brushes the hair out of a child's face or holds a hand, or sometimes it's just looks when you see the child looking at their parent and you can just see this thing that the parent probably doesn't see in that moment until they see it in photo. So I've had a session with a gay couple recently in Brighton who were moving to Australia. So they're now in Australia, and they booked me to photograph them before they moved away, because Brighton was such a big part of their life for the last years. That's where they became a family. They have now 2 children. And I sent them a sneak peek of the photos, and he's like, I cannot stop crying. You literally photographed us the way we are. And it's just like, I mean, that made my heart melt. And it's really hard to explain how I do it, because I just do it. Like, I try to just see the connections between people and see how everything works together. So everything in a frame needs to have a purpose. That's why I try to, so for example, I don't shoot wide open if I can, unless it's really dark. And try to everything, like I try to frame an image so that everything that's in there tells a part of the story, and that's how it creates meaning in the whole image. So if there's a picture in the background of, I don't know, grandma who is not there anymore, I wanted to try and frame an image where I move myself around so this image can be part of the frame without being maybe even center, or using heads or bodies to cover things that would kind of distract from the background, kind of just moving myself around so that clutter in the background, I don't mind clutter, but sometimes it's distracting. So I kind of move myself so that the things that are in the frame actually make sense and they contribute to the story of the image and the story of the family. I don't know if that makes sense.
It does. It does. And side note, you talking about using people to cover up things that maybe are distracting, or, shooting through people. I also love doing that. I love using people as compositional elements. And one of my biggest pet peeves ever is at weddings, whenever you pull up a camera and you try to say use somebody's shoulder as the left side of the frame and you're shooting over here, and they're like, "Oh, I'm
And then
so
they
sorry."
step
And they
away.
yeah, they
I
try to
know.
get out of the way. It's like, "No, no, no. I'm using you. I'm using you as composition. Don't ever feel like you have to get out of my way." I totally get that. But going back to this couple who you send them the photos, they're like, "I can't stop crying right now." How much of the photos that you created for them are what you would shoot organically versus what they said was important to them before the session? Does that make sense? I guess I'm just trying to figure out how much of the artist goes into it versus how much the client says, "This is what I really want. Can you do this for me?"
That's a very good question. It's a tough question, because it's hard for me to kind of separate those two, because so my goal when I shoot a family is not to create art. That is a side product. And if I can, I will. But my goal is to create something that means something to them. And the art comes second, but the art for me is always in there. So everything that I see, I try to make everything pretty in a way that has meaning. So it's really hard to explain, because a lot of the things I just do because I just see it like that.
Hmm. Hmm.
Since I feel artistry in general, art is so hard to put in words, because everybody sees it differently as well, and everybody has a different taste,
Yes.
like what kind of things they like. So for me, really, the main goal is to create photos that mean something to the family. And if I can create photos that I personally would call art, that's a bonus.
I like that so much. Yeah, it is very hard with how subjective photography is too. And that's one of the reasons why we don't really talk a lot about technicals on the show, is because technicals that I might choose for a certain scene are going to be totally different than something that you might choose. And I don't really want listeners to get an idea that, oh, in X scene you have to shoot X settings, because it is difficult. But I appreciate you trying to put that into words, even though it can be very difficult. I want to know a little bit more about the artistic side of you then, because I know that shooting every day is something that is important to you. Using photography as a form of creativity is important to you. And I want to ask about your long portrait, because the long portrait is a very cool idea. For those listening who haven't checked it out yet, I will let you explain it, but I really want to know where the idea came from, and also, like, what is the key to sticking to a creative project like this?
So basically, my creative projects are my way to create art for myself without having to rely on clients. And it also gives me the opportunity to just try and play and fail and just see what works and what doesn't. So I've got a lot of ideas for personal projects, and not all of them ever will be put into practice. And some I start and like, nah, it's fine. It's
We're
too much
done.
effort. I can't
Yeah.
do that. So I did one over lockdown that I started and I didn't really continue. But the long portrait is actually kind of haven't touched it in 2 years, and I really want to get back into it. So long portrait is kind of a portrait on steroids. So instead of just a photo of someone, I take about a 2 to 3 minute video of someone just looking at the camera, and that can be super intense. And then I overlay that with an interview. So I've got 5 questions for everybody who takes part in my long portrait, and then I create a story based on what they tell me. And so it's just to kind of understand, to give get a glimpse of who they are in that moment. So it's not a portrait of someone who's that they can carry with them, like, yeah, I'm still that 5 years later. They might be, but they might completely have changed directions. They might have different goals. They might have different values. So it's just a snapshot of who someone is at that time, but more than just a photo. But it's video and audio, and it's kind of this really really intense moment. It's intense for me to edit as well, sitting there looking at in someone's face, into someone's eyes for like 2 minutes straight while I edit this and try to tell the story of who they are, whether I know them or not. And
Yeah.
it's something I saw someone do something similar absolutely ages ago, but it was without audio. And I was like, I like this, but I feel like something's missing. And then I kind of played with that idea and decided I'm going to do it audio and video. So having the person looking at the camera, not talking, they're not saying anything, but then separately I record an interview with them and try to use that to tell the story of who that person is.
I have to admit, I can't imagine what it's like to edit that, because just watching it, for me, it's a very powerful and intimate look at somebody, even though not only are we miles apart, but also years apart as well. And that is really powerful. And I think one thing that I take into consideration when creating some sort of project is, like, what is the end goal, right? Like, is this going to be hung somewhere? Is this going to be printed somehow? Is this going to be posted somewhere? So for your idea for the long portrait, where it's not a traditional image, these are going on YouTube. Is something like that video aspect taken into consideration for this, or is just your history in video? Does that just make it a non-issue? Like, that's okay. People like videos. Does that question make sense? That was a giant question. I apologize.
With a lot of my projects, I actually don't really look at the end goal, which probably isn't how most people tell you how to approach a personal project.
No,
But
but
for
I'll tell you
me,
what, it gets you to get started, which is the hardest thing
it,
for me.
yeah, well, everybody's got different motivation. For me, it's just trying something and see if it goes, if it works. For the videos, I do have the idea. I would love to have an exhibition of this. I think that could be quite interesting.
Mm.
I haven't really looked into that yet, but yeah, because I don't necessarily start projects thinking about what I'm going to do with that in the end. I have this idea now and I want to see if it works and just see where it goes. So I'm kind of less about the final, I'm more about the journey than the goal, which is super cheesy, but I think that's the easiest way to describe it.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. That is such a hard thing. I'll be honest, I can't even relate to that at all. Like, I really wish that I could. I really wish that I could, because I'm sure that it would be a lot easier for me to start a project just having this idea and just going for it. But for me, every step has to be planned out before I even start. And that makes it, as you can imagine, extremely difficult to get going, because if you don't know what that end goal is, my head just says, well, then what's the point? But then I look at something like your long portraits and I think that is such a great idea. Like, I wish that I could have or would have done something like that. So if anybody's listening and they have one takeaway, it's just to get started. That's my biggest takeaway from this episode. Like, just get started and just do something, because that is going to be the momentum that you need.
The thing is, everybody, like I said, everybody needs a different kind of motivation. And if you do need and like something in the end to come out of it, then make this more a personal progression goal. So I've had projects where my goal was to shoot vertically because I always forget to turn my camera around. So I did a project 100 days. Like I called it 100 mornings. I'm very good with naming my projects, but it's all very literal. So 100 mornings. So every day before 11 a.m. I wanted to take a photos for 100 days, and it had to be vertical because I kept forgetting to turn my camera. And that was my goal, just to kind of remember to use my camera different ways and just be a bit more creative. And then also because I always took those photos on my way to work, that was when I was still employed, it also helped me to see the same scene differently every day and just see what can I do on that 20-minute walk to work. What can I see differently every single day? Which corner can I photograph differently today than yesterday? Or what happens on the way? What people do I see? What's the weather like? And just kind of just be more aware of what's right in front of you.
Did you ever miss a day?
No,
If you had, would that just kill your motivation, or would you just pick
no,
up the next day?
I would just keep going. So I've been doing Project 365 for over 3 years. I'm in my fourth year now, and I think I missed 2 days. And I was just
Wow.
like, okay, fine. I forgot. I'll take another one tomorrow.
Okay, so with these 365s, this is like the beginning of the year. 365s are it's something that a lot of people want to do. We, as the Beginner Photography Podcast, we have a daily photo challenge as well. And it's funny because like January, February, really strong. March, not so much April. And then by the end of the year, everybody has forgotten about it. So, what tips do you have to stay motivated and continue doing a 365?
My top tip is don't start January 1st because January is so full of pressure. We all want to live healthier. We want to exercise daily. We want to do yoga. We want to learn another craft.
Read
We
100 books. Yeah.
exactly read 100 books in the year, and then if we add on another one, like it's I don't know if you or your listeners have read Atomic Habits, but basically that's what James Clear talks about. Don't do If you want to create new habits, don't start with all of them at once. Do one at a time and add one. So if you add everything you want to do on January 1st, most of them are going to fail. So I started mine in November because that's when my birthday is. At one point, I'm just going to do this now. I wanted to do this for absolutely ages. Again, back to Flickr times is when I saw the first people do that, like 2008 or 2010. I think the first time I've heard of it. It's like, oh, that's really cool, but I could never do that. And then, like, thinking about it long and long and long enough, I at some point just decided I'm just going to do this, and I'm going to start on my birthday, because also it means I started when the weather and the light was the worst, like at least in the like northern hemisphere.
Mm-hmm.
So we have very little light, we have the worst weather. I mean, I don't know if you can hear it, but it's chucking down again. So I kind of needed to be okay with shooting in the dark and having just a short window of time where I could take photos with lots of daylight, and that helped me push through. Because then if I pushed through that, if I started with this but I had the longest time, then I went into the easy time in summer where just we're out more, there's more happening, we tend to do more with friends. It's just life just seems to happen starting in spring.
Yes.
And it just gets easier. So yeah, my second tip would be don't be afraid of dark days and grubby weather, and also make your own rules. So there's some people like to have a theme per day, per week, per month. I personally don't like that because then I feel very restricted, and I'm like, I need to shoot within that theme, but I don't actually know what to shoot within that now, so I'm just not going to shoot. So for me, it's I just shoot whatever happens. And sometimes I forget, so I have to get creative in the evening when the light is out. There's a photo of me in the bathroom with a mirror, and the mirror has like a fraction at the bottom, so you can see my eyes twice. And that happened because I was like, oh, it's like 10 p.m. I still haven't taken a photo. What can I do today? And so not every photo that I take within my 365 is documentary, but it's always a reflection of who I am. And I really love, so after every year, I make a book. And funnily enough, because my birthday is end of November, end of December during Black Friday, Blurb has 50% off books.
Yes.
So I save a ton of money on making my albums because they're thick. I put one photo on one page. So this is a 365 page book.
Wow.
It's a really chunky book, and I absolutely love looking through it and just seeing like what I did throughout the year, because we forget as well. Like I can barely remember what I did beginning of November, and we're like mid-January now. It's a nice reminder of who you were at a certain point, and it's having a photo or a second of video can spark so many memories of what you did during a day or during a week or during a period of your time, and just all the memories come back. And that's again why I love photography for as a profession, because I can give that to my clients to kind of help them remember who they used to be when the kids were small, how their life looked like, what their house looked like before they moved for the next 3 times, and just capturing these mundane things, especially with a 365. I mean, we also have to be okay with taking really bad photos. And they might not be bad in the grand scheme of things when you look through them all because they add to the story. But on the day, I'm like, that was really not a great photo. I really don't even want to share it. And I guess that's another. I'm sorry. I think you asked for 3. I've got loads of tips on that. But
Yeah,
I think
I
another one
appreciate all
is
of them.
to not make the project about sharing, but to make the project about yourself. And any personal project can just be for yourself. You don't have to share. You don't have to ask for validation or appreciation from anybody else but yourself. And that takes the pressure off, I would say, personally.
So you said one thing though that was, I believe it was learn to love the gross and muddy days.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people who did start a 365 January 1st, and this time of year, I feel like this is the longest stretch until springtime. So how do we do that? How do we love to learn those muddy days? What are we shooting on those days?
I think that's the best time to experiment. So experiment with long exposures. And that doesn't even have to mean that you figure out where to get a tripod from. But just take a photo with a slower shutter and just see what the image looks like. Again, it doesn't have to be about perfection, but if you take a photo and it's like 1/60, that's relatively slow, especially when it's dark, and you have like slight movement in the image, just appreciate that some days basically feel like a blur, and that's a good representation of what life is like. And just really push yourself into those dark moments, turn off the lights and see what you can do. Embrace the grain in the photo and embrace the imperfection of it, and just walk around the house and see what you can shoot. Like if you don't have light, just shoot into the light, like if you have a nice lampshade, shoot into that, and that is your photo of the day. I've done that because I didn't have any ideas. But when my boyfriend and I moved into this flat, we bought a lampshade for the bedroom, and I really like it. So one day I was like, if I'm out of ideas, this is going to be my photo. And
You
I
already
did that.
pre-planned it.
I did. Yeah, I think after a certain amount of time, you know how to kind of see things in your flat. And like, okay, if I really run out of ideas, I can photograph this corner because it means a lot to me because there's some photos hanging, or because I want to see how that plant grows over the next 6 months. So I take this photo now and again in 6 months. It's hard, but just be okay with dark photos, be okay with grain, be okay with blurry, because it's just for yourself. And in the end, you'll be glad to just kept going instead of stopping because, oh, I really can't do anything because the light is bad.
Yeah.
I mean, if you really want, you can play with long exposures. Just put your camera on a table. If you don't have a tripod, just put it on a table, set the shutter speed for relatively long, and walk through the image and photograph yourself blurry in the image. Like there's so much you can do. Just kind of, I like the restriction that the darkness can give you, because it really has, you have to stretch your imagination of what can you do. And again, just you can photograph details. And again, if they're blurry or if they're grainy, whatever, it doesn't matter. It's not about the perfection. It's about taking the photo.
That is powerful right there. That is something that I hope a lot of listeners take to heart because, again, it can be hard to get started, but just simply set up a phone or your camera and just do a long exposure and just experiment. I love that. I know that we are getting close to the end of our time here. And you said that kind of one of the reasons why you got into photography was because there was this big part of your childhood being gymnastics. And, well, you didn't have any photos of it. And that kind of hurts inside. So you try to give that to your family. So I want to know, all these years later, what have you now learned about yourself through photography, through shooting as much as you do?
I think the main thing I've learned is that I'm very good at discipline and I'm very tenacious. Like I have this, it's literally a problem. I can't, if I made a commitment to myself, I can't stop. And I know that sometimes we need to stop things that don't work, but I feel like I can't. So if I promise myself I'm going to do something, I'm going to do 100 days of photos or 365, I would be very disappointed with myself if I stopped. And that can actually be bad because it might keep me in a situation that might not be good for me. So I'm working on that. But I think it's just, my confidence has grown through photography because I'm an introvert. I don't go out to say hello to people, but my camera is a tool for me to connect with people that I find interesting. And it's so much easier to say, I'm a photographer, this is my camera, can I take a photo of you? Just because I find someone interesting on the street. And I think it allowed me to kind of step bit by bit out of my comfort zone and just grow in that sense, it lets me grow as a creative, because I then put myself in a situation where I have a very short window of time and I want to nail that photo. So that's a creative challenge, but also just a personal challenge, just to approach someone I don't know, that I wouldn't do without my camera.
So obviously, let's see, you see somebody, you think that, wow, there's something about this person that I find interesting. Walk me through that. This is what people want. They want to be able to approach strangers and be able to capture who it is that they are. So how do you do it?
So I've done that a few years ago with a friend. So my goal was to just get braver and approach strangers on the street and to take street portraits, because again, it challenges me to, in a very short amount of time, see where the light is, take a nice photo, and not feel like an idiot. So what my friend and I did, we went to London South Bank, which is a very busy area, and we just sat there and watched. So that's kind of the first thing, is just get comfortable with where you are. Don't keep running around like a crazy person. Just find a spot that you feel will look good in photos, makes you comfortable, is not too crowded so people don't rush past you, or you can't actually take a nice photo because it's too busy, and just kind of sit there and watch and see what kind of people come past. And then at some point, just stand up and walk towards someone and introduce yourself with your name and say, like, I'm a photographer and I'm taking photos of people on the street. Do you mind if I take your photo? And 9 out of 10 times you get a yes. And when you get a no, just deal with it. It's You think it's going to be so heartbreaking when someone says no, but actually when the first person said no, it's like, that's fine. And it actually didn't faze me that much. So my goal was within an afternoon to get 20 portraits, and I did get them.
Wow.
I think I got 2 or 3 no's, which is quite good. I thought I would get a lot more no's, but because most people will actually say yes, it's a really good challenge.
Hmm.
And I mean, if you have like a little business card or a little card where you have like your Instagram, so you can connect with them and say, I'll send you the photo, just message me, then they have something from it as well. So I used to have, I don't know if you know the company Moo, they
Yeah.
have these really tiny cards. I used to make them in the past, just saying like, my name is Anja, I like taking photos and this is my Instagram. And then I just would give them that card and they can connect with me that way and ask, can I have my photo please? And I would send it to them. And
Wow.
it's a really easy way to kind of make sure it's not just one side, it's not just for you to get something out of it, but they get the photo as well. And that personally makes me feel good, because I took a nice photo of them. I don't know what they're going to do with it, but maybe
But
it makes them happy.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, they wanted it for a reason. No, that makes sense. That is, I think it's funny when I try to think of, approaching people on the street, I would assume, and I think many others would assume as well, that you'd get 19 no's and one yes. But to hear that it was the opposite and that you only got 2 or 3 no's and then the rest were yeses, I hope gives people confidence to go out and try it themselves, because I would imagine that that is a huge boost of confidence in your abilities as a photographer and interacting with those in your community as well. So, yeah, thank you for sharing that, Anya. I
I
know.
do think you have to kind of read the room though. So if you do that on a Monday morning at 8 a.m. when everybody's rushing to work, the chances that you're gonna get a no is very high. So do it at a time where you feel like people are not rushing to get anywhere. So I personally find weekends easier for that, because people just have more time.
Of course, yes, of course, of course. Especially in a more of a maybe you think a touristy location or more of a travel location would help as well.
It depends. I personally like to shoot locals more than tourists,
Hmm.
because especially in London, like you can see who's the local and who's the tourist, because the locals in London and in Brighton, it's very flamboyant and people just dress however they want. And you can see the tourists who are just, they're dressed differently. They have a different flair about them. So I would probably not necessarily, I mean, the South Bank is relatively touristy, but I would probably go not necessarily somewhere where you can tell that 90% are going to be tourists. I mean, chances are that you're going to get a lot of yeses there too, but I personally find it more interesting to get the locals.
Yes, I love it. Well, Anya, we are at the end of our time here. I know that people are listening, thinking to themselves, I would love to learn more about Anya, what she does, and see some of her work as well. So, can you share with us where we can find you online?
Sure. So I'm on Instagram at by_Anja P, Anja with a J. And my website is anjapoehlmann.com, which probably nobody knows how to spell.
That's why it'll be in the show notes.
Yes. So that's the best places, but I am on Instagram quite a bit.
Tell you, it is all about expanding your experience, expanding your world of art and creativity to be able to do these things. This is so great. I loved this interview with Anja. I had 3 big takeaways, as always, that I'm going to share with you. The first one is you are the only person who can create the photos that you create. Wow, you are the only person who can create the photos that you create. So no matter what camera you have, it doesn't matter if you have the same camera as, a photographer who is a National Geographic photographer or a sports photographer. It doesn't matter because you are the only person who can create the photos that you can create. It's not the camera. So lean into what makes you unique. Don't try to follow all of the same rules that everybody else follows because that's going to make you the same as them and you're not going to stand out. Takeaway number 2 was to be open to try new things. If it doesn't work out, well, again, that's one less thing that you have to worry about doing in the future. And now you have the space to find the things that you love the most. I will tell you, in the past, I have had ideas that I thought this is going to work, this is going to be amazing. And I just kept putting it off because I don't know, I was scared or it was a lot of work or something like that. And when it came time to actually do it, I didn't like it. And I thought to myself, wow, I just spent either months or years thinking about something that I don't even like. And imagine if I had just tried it that first time, then I wouldn't have had to waste all that time thinking about it. And then I could have moved on to something else that I might have enjoyed even more. So try those new things. Don't just learn about them and think about them. Try them too. And the last takeaway was that the art comes second. This is one of my manifesto items. You can make money and you can make art, but you can't do both well. If you make art while working for a client, then hey, great, it's a surprise. But when money is involved, you will always shoot for your clients. And that's okay. Just know that that's going to happen. All right. Now I want to take a moment to showcase our member of the week, our listener of the week, Chuck from Snap Chuck. Again, he is our listener of the week for leaving the podcast a 5-star rating and review in Apple Podcast. Now, Chuck says, I've been listening to the podcast for a few years. Wow, that's awesome. The content is top-notch, and the interviews with photographers of all genres are inspiring and enlightening. I also enjoy the interviews with members of the BPP community. That is our Community Spotlight series, those interviews. This is more than just a podcast, but even without the community, the information contained within these episodes will help you learn and master your camera. Man, Chuck, I am thrilled that you are enjoying the podcast, and I thank you so much for taking the time to share your thoughts with me and letting me know that I'm on the right track. If you are listening and you are enjoying the show, again, I can't tell you how helpful reviews are. If you are listening in Spotify, you can leave the podcast a star rating right on the show's homepage. And if you want to leave me feedback directly, feel free to shoot me an email, or better yet, a voicemail by heading over to the contact page at beginnerphotographypodcast.com. I hope to hear from you. All right, that is it for this week. Thank you again for tuning into this episode of the Beginner Photography Podcast brought to you by CloudSpot. It truly is the easiest way to deliver and sell your photos online. You can learn more about CloudSpot and grab your free forever account at deliverphotos.com. And remember, the more that you shoot today, the better of a photographer you will be tomorrow. Talk soon.
Thank you for listening to the Beginner Photography Podcast. If you enjoy the show, consider leaving a review in iTunes. Keep shooting, and we'll see you next week.